All right, Jamal, you're live.
Welcome, everyone, to General and Housing Committee in the House of Representatives. Today is January 23rd, all day. And we're going to start today. I'm just going to review our day. We're going to start today with Elizabeth Bridgewater, Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust. And then we're going to introduce ourselves to two members of different chambers of commerce. And then we're going to have presentations around labor because it's part of our jurisdiction, not just housing. And then at 11 o'clock, I'm going to give you all the draft letter that I have prepared to send to, it's from us, all of us guys. And we're sending it to Appropriations Committee and saying, here's what we think you ought to do with your money. And of course, they will do everything we say. So, Elizabeth, I think what we're going to do is introduce ourselves to you. Although we're missing three of our members, we'll still introduce ourselves to you. Ashley, you want to start?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Ashley Bartley. I represent the towns of Fairfax and Georgia.
Tom Charlton, and I represent Athens, Grafton, Wyndham, and Chester.
I'm Debbie Dolgan. I represent St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
I'm Gail Pezzo. I represent Chittenden 20 Colchester.
Good morning, I'm Mary Howard. I represent Rutland City District 6.
Good morning, fellow Elizabeth. I'm Elizabeth Burrows, and I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Great. Emily Krasnow, and I represent South Burlington and 9.
And Leonora, you just walked in. You want to introduce yourself to Elizabeth Bridgewater?
Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth. I'm Leonora Dodge. I represent part of the town of Essex and part of the city of Essex Junction. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I'm Mark Mahaly, and I am chair, and I represent Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield. So, Elizabeth, you want to state your name and what you do for the record and take it away.
Yes, hi, I'm Elizabeth Bridgewater, and I'm the executive director of the Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust. And I'm going to share my screen, I hope. Let's see. Can you all see that?
Yep, we can.
Great, thank you. So the Wyndham, and I'm just going to do a brief overview of the Housing Trust, and partly as a way to share our impact in the community, and also as a way to thank you for your work, because so much of our work is enabled by the work that you do. And then I'm going to go through some of the dynamics that are happening in our community as a way to help you understand how I arrived at the legislative priorities that I'm going to present towards the end of the presentation. And then I'm happy to answer any
One of the things I might say is you've got about 22 minutes.
Okay.
So make sure you don't become a prisoner of your show and then not have time to tell us your legislative priorities.
Yeah, I've only got about 5 slides, so it's not a presentation.
Great, thank you.
For folks that aren't familiar with us, we were founded in 1987. Our mission is to strengthen the communities of southeastern Vermont through the development and stewardship of permanent affordable housing and through the ongoing support and advocacy of our residents. This is a summary of our impact in the community across the 2 counties of Wyndham and Windsor. So we have a portfolio of almost 900 affordable apartments, permanently affordable. We've got 113 new units in the pipeline, 25 of which will come online this summer in Windsor. We're very excited about that. We own 3 mobile home parks and have 42 lots, 145 shared equity homes. And then just to give you a sense of like how many home buyers we work with over the last 5 years, we've helped educate 650 home buyers, 1,200 received counseling, and then we helped new home buyers, 229 new home buyers buy their homes. The Vermont Green Mountain Home Repair Program, we do an average of 25 home repairs each year. And the Vermont housing improvement program, since it started during the COVID years, we've helped bring on 210 units. We've got 125 in construction right now and another 25 in the application stage. So that's been a really successful way to bring new units online quickly. And then we have 3 SASH panels. 2 are serving the traditional SASH target market of folks over 65 and those with disabilities. And then we have the SASH for All panel pilot in Brattleboro in collaboration with the Brattleboro Housing Partnership. So I'm going to, you know, a lot of the dynamics that I'm going to talk about, but I want to just highlight some of the specific dynamics of Windham and Windsor County, since that's where we do our work. So none of this is going to be new news, but I think the nuance of what's happening in our community might be interesting for you to hear. So as you know, we're in a housing crisis, and in our community, the kind of unique aspects of that housing crisis is that during the pandemic years, we saw a tremendous increase in out-of-state buyers that have, basically bought homes and those are no longer for local residents. We also have a kind of higher percentage of seasonal homes in our 2 counties. The statewide average of seasonal homes is 15%, and in Windham we have 30, and in Windsor we have 23. So we are definitely experiencing a fairly tight market. Brattleboro has done their own needs assessment in addition to the statewide assessment, and they've identified the need for 25 new homes in Brattleboro alone.
You mean 500? You said 25. Did you mean 500?
Did I say 25? I meant 500.
It's early yet.
You definitely got our attention.
So this slide is really interesting. We're just finishing a strategic plan, and our strategic planning consultant put this slide together for us. And it not only shows the rise in homelessness in Vermont, but it also shows the trends from pre-pandemic years to what's happening right now. And it's really interesting how Windham County in particular has been impacted over the last 5 years. So the kind of teal colored bar that starts on the left shows the January point in time count in 2020. And then the middle bar, the kind of royal blue color, shows the January point in time count for 2024. And then the final bar is the usage of the GA emergency motel program from October through November in 2024. And what these bars are measuring is the proportionality of, or the disproportionality of the unhoused population as it relates to the general population in each county. And so number 1, if those, if somebody has a number, if a county has a number 1, the unhoused population is commensurate with the population of that county. And so you can see that Windham in particular had a higher proportion of unhoused folks as it relates to the population in that county before the pandemic, and that has shifted up fairly dramatically. You can see it in Rutland too, and to a certain extent in Windsor. And then in other counties, you can see the trends actually going down or staying stable. So how we're interpreting this data is that there has been a shift in where the unhoused population in Vermont is living right now, or not living, but existing right now. And Windham County is definitely seen a significant rise in this population. I also want to talk about the trends around fentanyl in particular, because we all know that there's a pretty significant opioid crisis that's hitting Vermont. And this graph came from an article in the New York Times that was published in September. And what jumped out at me, this was an article about fentanyl and how it kind of flooded the drug market across the country and the impact that it's having nationally. And they showed a series of maps that showed that it started in New England, and then subsequently how how it flooded across the country. What jumped out at me as I was reading it is if you look at Vermont, the very dark color there shows that while it started in New England, it really hit Vermont early and really hard, because that dark color shows that it's 80% of the drug supply in 2019 was included fentanyl. And why this feels really important to point out is that this started to occur right when the pandemic hit. And so before I read this article, I was, we've all observed that things have gotten really challenging since the pandemic for really vulnerable people. And we've thought about the isolation factor and the diminishment of the availability of services and, people losing their jobs. And what we didn't factor in was that this was also when fentanyl hit the drug supply, and it's infinitely more addictive. It has a shorter duration of impact on a person's body. And so while these stresses were happening during the pandemic, if people were turning towards addiction as a way to get some relief from the feelings that they were having, they were encountering a drug that was much, much more potent than anything we had seen in the drug supply. And so it really amplified, and we're seeing this in our community. And so when I saw this article, it was both challenging to read, but also help put some shape around what happened in our community and why we're seeing things really more challenging than we had ever seen before. And this just shows the Vermont drug supply numbers, and you can see that it really started to rise in 2017 and just skyrocketed during the pandemic in terms of fentanyl.
Can I?
Go ahead, please.
Thanks.
And then
I'm sorry.
Tom, after that.
Okay, great, thanks. Did you mention, Elizabeth, so 2 slides ago, the rising homelessness? Yes, did you point to your sources for those?
Yes, so the first bar came from the January point in time count.
So I'm sorry, I'm new to this committee. I was in transportation, so I should know this, but is this just performed by like the people on the ground and then they report up to a state agency, et cetera? Can you?
Yeah, and actually it's going on right now for 2025. So for a few days each year in January, advocates and outreach and, a whole network of people go out and identify who's unhoused and living on the streets. And then they roll up that data into a statewide report. And it's done around the same time every year so that you get a similar point in time. And so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah,
And then the
okay,
last
great.
number is a little bit different just because the point in time count hadn't happened yet.
Oh,
So we're trying to get the most up-to-date data. So that's not the exact same data. And I think we'll update this graph when we get the new point in time count, and we'll see if the trend is continuing to happen.
Thank you. And then the numbers that you have on your slide that you're actually on, the fentanyl has flooded, is that like is that based on like drug seizures? Is that based on, what are the numbers referring to? Units of what? 44 watts?
That
Or-
is a good question. I believe it's, yeah, you know what? I'm not 100% clear, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that. I know that I want to say it's on seizures and like the percentage of there can't be a percentage. You know what? I'm gonna need to get back to you on that exact what it is they're measuring. I was sort of focused on the trend line going up, but
Yes, no, that makes sense to focus on the trends, especially when it's so dramatic,
Yeah.
but thank you.
Gail?
Did you have your hands up?
Oh,
That was my question.
He got his question
Oh,
answered.
okay. Can you go back to that other slide again? So does that metric have anything to do where there's lower cost motels
I
in
think
each
that's-
town?
yeah, I think that's what we're wondering is, Wyndham and particularly in Brattleboro, has a fair number of motels, and so they were an active participant in the emergency motel program. And I'm assuming that other communities may not have that or may not have participated, like the particular motel owners. I'm
So
not,
those homeless, let's just say, in Essex and Orleans, if they don't have, then in another town, they could use another town's cheaper motels in that program.
I'm not sure if it's related to cost, whether it's cheaper or not. I think that,
Well, yeah, if they would be part of that program.
yeah, I just know that Windham County and Brattleboro in particular had a high number of motels that participated in the emergency motel program during the pandemic years. And I don't know if that's because there's more hotels here than in other communities, or if those particular owners signed up where other community owners didn't. I'm not sure what the underlying, reason for motel participation across the state. But this is what we're seeing as, the impact of where unhoused people are now, over the last 5 years.
Elizabeth?
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify that the point in time count is based on usage, right? It's not, so it doesn't take into account people who aren't using the services or that are either available or not available.
Couch surfing and sleeping in a car.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my understanding that people are out on the streets identifying where people are located, and it's not necessarily whether they're signed up for services. That's my understanding, but I've actually personally have not done the point in time count.
I think it's based on usage because that's why it's often quoted as being very
Underrepresented. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I had a feeling that this slide was going to be an interesting thing to talk about, because it really kind of jumped out at us when we saw these numbers. And like the fentanyl slide, it helped explain why we're struggling so much in our community with some of these dynamics. So the last slide I want to show you is just like one example of how this is impacting our communities. So 9 Canal is a property that we own, and it's right in downtown Brattleboro. And it is the housing community that's over the Brattleboro Food Co-op. So if anybody's been shopping at the Brattleboro Food Co-op and there's 25 apartments above it, that's the address that I'm referring to here. There's a side entrance that's sort of away from the co-op and away from sort of an emergency exit. And as the motel program ended, you can see the trend lines here for police calls at this property. And a lot of it's related to the side entrance. People have broken into the building repeatedly. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of unhoused people just trying to find places to go and sleep. And this particular building has been a target location for them. And it's been really disruptive to the residents that live there. It's been disruptive to the police department, who are responding to resident calls and community calls. And the reason why we were comparing it to last year is because we wanted to see if we had a few issues at this property in the winter last year, but nothing like we're seeing now. And I think this is another data point that shows the impact of the sunsetting of the motel program and the people who are now living on the streets and just trying to find a place to be at night. And it's also been really challenging financially for us because there's been a lot of property damage. The reason why I bring this up is because when I talk about our legislative priorities, I want to acknowledge that you have a really tough job in terms of trying to figure out like how to spend state resources. And I know that there's so much drawing on your attention, and there's so many people that are advocating for different things. And so it was, as I was preparing for this, I wanted to present a set of priorities that are interrelated and are addressing some of the most challenging dynamics that we are seeing in our community. And so I've broken them into these 4 categories of capital investment, human investment, regulatory reform, and then specifically the landlord relief program, and asking for an extension of that because that is addressing eviction prevention in a very tangible way. So on the capital investment side, we need new housing. We need new housing of all kinds. And our mission is to provide affordable housing. So I'm advocating for funding for affordable homes with permanent affordability, both rental and home ownership. And that for us, that money flows through VHCB. So I'm advocating for full statutory funding for VHCB, which is about $35 million this year. I also am advocating for shelter capacity. This is a huge gap that we're seeing in our community. And I think the last slide shows the impact that that's having. And then more recovery housing. We have very little recovery options in Brattleboro. Some of the sober housing closed in the last 5 years, and we haven't had any start up again. I know the Retreat is no longer providing very targeted recovery supports, particularly around fentanyl. And so there's a massive gap in a safe place for people to go when they do get into recovery. And this feels like a significant gap in the housing system. And I'm also advocating for human investment. So we need new buildings and places for people to live that are both general and targeted to their needs, like shelter and recovery housing. But we also need staffing that can support people as they stabilize in these places. We have a Sash for All program that is we're kind of still in the pilot phase and want to both maintain that program permanently, but also expand it across the state to other locations in the state. So I'm advocating for that this year. That is a $2.4 million ask that will serve an additional 1,200 people across the state by opening 12 new panels. Regulatory reform, I'm a really passionate advocate for appeal reform. I think this is probably the 3rd year that I will be bringing up the Alice Hallway Drive project in Putney, which has finally, after 3 full years, cleared the 4 different appeals that were attempted on this project. During that delay, that 3-year delay, the project costs have risen $4 million. So that's basically $4 million that could have been redirected to other, worthy housing programs, either in Windham County or across the state. And that's just because construction costs have, dramatically risen. And I think our legal costs were about 80 grand. So that was also added to the project budget. I know last year there was some talk about looking at housing court specifically for appeals. And there's a great New Hampshire model that seems to be working really well in New Hampshire. So I hope that this will be re-looked at this year. I know it didn't make it into any of the bills last year, but I think it's really critical that appeal reform happen this year.
Elizabeth, what in the case that you just mentioned, what were the permits appealed?
The first was the zoning permit.
Okay.
And we hadn't asked for any variances. There was nothing in there that was appealable, frankly. But, with $250, one can apply for an appeal and you have to go through the whole process. So we did. They took it to the Supreme Court. So the zoning permit was appealed twice, one to the Environmental Division and then one to the Supreme Court. And then the second appeal was the jurisdictional opinion that we were exempt from Act 250. And so that got appealed, and that was lost, and they took that to the Supreme Court. So that was another significant delay. And frankly, if they had been paying attention, there were other permits that could have been appealed. The wastewater permit could have been appealed. And they didn't catch that one, but if they had, they could have used this delay tactic to even delay the project further. So, you know, this was originally one person that lives adjacent to the property, ironically in an affordable housing rental unit, but didn't like the fact that there was going to be another housing project adjacent to where she lived, and she very effectively single-handedly delayed this project for 3 years and increased the cost by $4 million. So that's a pretty stark example of what's wrong with the program. And I think the thing that's really interesting about Putney in particular is this parcel of land had been called out in a community visioning project about 10 years ago as an ideal location for housing. It also was in several town planning documents. So it had also been identified in town planning documents, which of course have widespread community engagement. And then finally, it's in a neighborhood development area, which also had community engagement in order to actually get the NDA approved by the state. So this parcel of land had gone through many, many different community processes that all identified it as a great location for housing. And one person was able to derail that. So there's something broken in that process that needs to be fixed. And there are good examples in other states of how they do that. And I think the New Hampshire example is a really good one.
Thank you. Elizabeth, do you have a question?
I've got a question for you, Elizabeth. Going back to your second slide about the organizational impact across 2 counties.
Yep.
So first, 2 questions. First of all, is this all that Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust has accomplished since 1987?
No, because the homebuyer education, homeowner counseling, new home buyers, Green Mountain Home Repair, those are all just like the last 5 years.
Okay.
But the actual portfolio of affordable housing, the 887 units, and that, yes, that's a collective impact of housing development and housing repair over, like, acquisition and rehab over the last 37 years.
I wondered if you could tell us of all of these things in your portfolio, how many, I would imagine that you don't have this number right off the top of your head, but how many of these are permanently affordable?
All but the affordable apartments are permanently affordable. The shared equity homes are permanently affordable. The Green Mountain Home Repair is a homeowner program, so that is not, that doesn't have a deed restriction on it. The Vermont Housing Improvement Program, none of those have permanent affordability attached to them. Those have limited covenants that are based on the size of the investment that the private property owner agrees to. And most of them sunset after 10 years. So that's a different type of strategy than permanent affordability. And it has a lower investment. I think that's commensurate with that strategy.
The VHIT program has an option of either 5 or 10 years. I wonder if you know the proportion of 5 over 10 years.
No, I could get that number. We've got a matrix that has that, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
That would be great if you could provide that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're just about out of time, so you want to tell us about landlord relief?
Yeah, this is a great program that enables residents who get significantly behind on their rent and there's just no way to catch up. And so they can apply for a, a payment of their rent up to $10,000. There's some tenant damages as well, like to the apartment. And in an exchange, the property owner has to agree not to continue with the eviction and not to engage in any payment related, like non-payment related eviction proceedings for the next 6 months. If there's reasons to proceed for cause, like, egregious lease violations, the housing provider can do that, but not for non-payment. So it's a way for folks to get back on track, and it's a way for housing providers to collect, significant relief around high balance accounts receivable. So I think it's both an eviction prevention program, it's a stabilizing program for residents, it's a stabilizing program for landlords. And so I'm hoping that this will be continued this year.
I've got a question about that. So are you the administrator of this program?
No, the Vermont State Housing Authority is.
Okay, and so this is strictly a landlord program, right?
Yes.
And is there any duty to report to the tenant that the landlord has filed for landlord relief?
I'm not sure the nature of your question. They would be alerted because the agreement is that we would sign a new lease with them, that we would refrain from proceeding with the eviction. So if there's a court process in progress, we would terminate that and they would be aware of that. So there's a lot of mechanisms where the resident would be aware of the program.
I guess what I'm asking is, can the landlord continue to pursue back rent if the landlord has already engaged in landlord relief?
One of the requirements is that we would not collect on fees and things like that. And we have to forgive those. But I think with a balance up to $10,000, we would, there's a whole decision tree of whether or not we would pursue this option or not. And one of them is whether the resident actually has the ability to continue paying rent in the future. So it's, part of the marketing materials for the program is they're saving sustainable tenancies. So they don't want to spend money on somebody that's likely going to be in the same position in a few months because there's just an inability to pay rent. But if somebody actually has the ability to pay rent, we would seek to apply for the entire rent balance that they have due. And we would be looking to do that before it reached the limit of what the program offers.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for testifying for us.
Thank you for inviting me. And again, let me just close by saying I really appreciate the position that you're in and the work that you do, and that we would not be able to do the work that we do without your support and help. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
So next, we are going to hear from Megan Sullivan and Austin Davis, both chambers of commerce.
Good morning, Megan Sullivan, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. It is lovely to see you all again today. For my introduction, I think I am trying to join the Zoom. Okay, I've muted it this time. So we're already one step ahead of. Except sharing is not turned on. So I am gonna I have our sort of generic, here's who we are presentation that we've been doing in committees this year. I'm gonna try and go through that really fast with the offer that I am always here in this building. And so if you have want to talk more about any of our specific or more broad priorities, anytime I'm happy to do that, and I'll share this presentation so you can ask those questions. But what I would love to spend more time on is our work on housing and involvement in housing proposals and legislation. So okay. Here we go. All right, so basically lots of words here, but generally the mission of the Vermont Chamber is to advance the Vermont economy, and businesses around the state trust in us to spend time in this building, to work with legislators here as well as with our federal delegation to make progress on that mission. As I mentioned yesterday, we have members around the state in every industry, and sort of the difference between the state chamber and your local or regional chambers is we do operate on a statewide level. So when we're doing educational or gatherings, it is statewide. So our economic conference that's happening next week is really bringing together folks from around the state to talk about what's going on in the state economy as well as what's happening nationally and internationally. Whereas your local chamber may be more focused, still with the same mission of, right, how do we advance the economy of our region, but on bringing folks together locally, talking about more local issues. And the US Chamber is working on a national level. Their membership is on a national level. There's no affiliation between the state chamber and the local chambers, or the state chamber and the US Chamber, though we do work closely, especially with our local and regional chambers on what they're dealing with, as well as they're getting information from us on legislation. Also want to mention that the foundation of the Vermont Chamber is the Vermont Futures Project, which is run by Kevin Chu. The Futures Project is an independent organization. They're not a lobbying organization, and have an independent board, but we're sort of born out of the Vermont Chamber. Kevin will be releasing an economic action plan in the next week, and so I'm sure we'll be in this building talking about that. But if you had a chance to hear Kevin speak, he's fabulous. So look for more information there. Our membership is, I would say, a third tourism hospitality, a third manufacturing, and then a third what we call professional services, which is sort of a catch-all for most other things. But given the number of businesses in tourism, hospitality, and manufacturing, we really try and keep track of what's going on in those industries, and to help us inform what we want to be talking about here. And so you can see just some data on how many people are working in tourism and hospitality, and the economic impact there. And same with manufacturing. We will be supporting and helping organize 2 industry days in the State House, one around the visitor economy. That one, for members who have been here, probably have seen before. We bring a ton of hospitality businesses in and really showcase what the tourism industry is in Vermont. Manufacturing is another really important sector in Vermont. And we are going to be having the first manufacturing day this year to highlight the manufacturing that's happening in the state. There are some really cool things that are built, made in the state, innovations, and we want to bring more light to that in the State House. So we're working to pull together a manufacturing day. The date for that yet? I believe it's going to be February 26th And Tourism Economy Day will be April 10th or 11th,
Thank
but
you.
more to come. A little bit about our advocacy work. We try to be really proactive, engaging, and be data informed. And I think the important point here is data informed rather than data driven. We're driven by people. And we're informed by data. Our team, Amy Spear, who is the chamber president, Betsy Bishop, who you may have known, retired this summer, and Amy's new president. She's phenomenal. And so you'll see her in the building. She's working on tourism and hospitality issues, as well as fiscal issues. I'm here all the time, every day, sort of catch all, working on a lot of things, but land use, housing, economic development, fiscal policy. Jeremy Little is a new policy associate with us. He was an intern with us 2 years ago, and we were able to bring him on full time. And he'll be really focusing on issues that specific to manufacturing around energy and environment. We'll also be working on healthcare. And Karen Duguay, who will be helping us organize those industry days. Generally, our priorities for this session are around, I think nothing that everyone isn't talking about, right? Affordability through critical reforms. How do we reform things like, we're talking about permitting process in housing, appeals process in housing, looking at incremental goals to some of our incremental progress towards some of our really aspirational goals. How can we get there in a way that businesses can absorb these changes? So whether we're talking about an heat standard or childcare, let's look at how we're doing at things, really explore the data and understand how we can make progress in a way where people can actually absorb this change. And innovative solutions. There are ideas around how do we do things in a new way to address some of these big problems, especially when we talk about our demographics, people and places. What are things we need to work on in housing that we haven't done much of before? What are things we need to do to address our demographic challenges that could try and move that dial? So again, some slides that go more into those. If people want to talk to me about them, I'm happy to, but I do know that I'm sharing time with Austin. I don't want to take all of his time. One other thing I do want to mention, though, is we have 8 paid interns who are working with us this session. Interns are from the University of Vermont, St. Michael's College, and from Middlebury. We'll have 2 folks in here every day, and so you may see them in your committee room. If you see a young person with a Vermont Chamber name tag, likely an intern. And part of our mission here is to keep them engaged if they're interested in policy and politics, bringing them into this building and introducing them to folks who are working in that so they can find career paths to stay in Vermont. So if you see them, feel free to say hi. They're all incredibly friendly and super smart. Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, thank you for paying your interns.
Yeah, I
Very
mean,
important.
I think we want everyone to be able to
Exactly.
have an internship.
Yeah.
And so being able to provide payment so that it's not a barrier to access a program like this. So it's time, travel, and then lunch in the cafeteria. So
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
Thank you. I've got 2 quick questions. The first one is, you said that your members are 1/3 tourism, 1/3 manufacturing. What was the third?
Professional services, so that could be banking, insurance,
And how much of you had the amount of the GDP for the other 2, but how much for that sector?
I think because that's so broad, we sort of put everybody in that rather than break it down into smaller buckets. It would be hard to say what the GDP for all of those things are. I could try and aggregate that, but I don't have that.
Okay, and how many of your members have fewer than 30 employees?
Our average member size is 4. So I would say on average, most businesses in Vermont, 92% of businesses have under 20 employees, which I would say is probably reflective of our membership, but I'd have to chat with our membership director to get the stats on that.
Okay, and well, let me put it this way.
Yeah.
What's the proportion of Vermont Chamber members out of all of the businesses in Vermont?
Of all of the businesses of Vermont, how many of them are Vermont Chamber members?
Yep.
I would have to do that or ask our membership director to
Well,
get that data.
do you represent half of all businesses in Vermont or 8/10 of all businesses in Vermont or?
Well, what are there? 30,000 businesses in Vermont, so not half. I would say we have a smaller proportion of that. A lot of businesses that are one-person solopreneurs don't join the statewide Chamber of Commerce.
How many members do you have?
Around 1,000.
Around 1,000.
Yeah.
Thank you.
State to Main is our newsletter that goes out every Friday. This goes to all of our members and we also send it to all legislators. We try and cover, what's happening in the State House that the business community should be aware of. If you read this and you feel like you guys did something great that we didn't cover and you want to come up to me and say, hey, this should be in State to Main, feel free to do that. Or if you have questions about anything we put in there, but this should come to your inbox every Monday. Okay, so that was our general overview. Thank you for letting me get through that. I want to talk about our work in housing. We got engaged in the housing conversation. I think when we started hearing more and more from our members about what a challenge it was for them to be able to attract and retain their employees because of housing challenges. So this is employers who are saying, I've got a great candidate, they've accepted the job, and then they were supposed to start in 2 weeks, and they just said they can't because they can't find any place to live. Or one of the stories that has really stayed with me is an employer who has a great workforce that includes a lot of new Americans and a workforce of, I think, one family that had 4 people working at this manufacturing facility. They had been there for 10 years, worked up into leadership positions. And those families said, you know what, we've been here, we've had incredible support as new Americans to get housing. We have these great jobs and now we want to buy homes. And they were looking for homes in Chittenden County for $400,000. And it was like, nothing, there was nothing. And so then they looked in Ohio and were like, we can get beautiful homes right next to each other. So our families, our extended families can stay together. And there are job opportunities there as well. And that was devastating for that company to lose these really incredible employees because they couldn't find reasonable housing in that price range in Vermont. So where we have gotten involved in housing, I've sort of put into 3 buckets. So regulatory reform, we were part of the stakeholder group 2 summers ago that worked on the updates to Act 250 and were part of every conversation that was happening in this building on that last year. And what the bill on Act 250 did last year was really set out a process for reform. Part of that process is for that tier 1 where there's full exemptions for Act 250. Those are going through the RPCs. Tier 3 will be happening through a rulemaking process to allow for a lot of public input. We'll be on the stakeholder group looking at Tier 3. That I believe is set to start fairly soon, but with a new land use review board, sort of let them come up to speed. We'll also be participating in the appeals study. I know there was mention that appeals were not part of last year's bill. Appeals were part of, I think there was still a lot of disagreement. So it was decided like, let's get people back into a room, very diverse group of people to try and hash some of this out. So that appeals study, I believe, is also set to start soon, again, with the LURB getting off the ground, looking into that. And we've also been supportive of H181 and the home bill the year before, that some of the municipal permitting changes that have happened there. strategic investments, programs like the Middle Income Homeownership Development Program, the Rental Revolving Loan Fund, VHIP, MHIP, all programs where we see really incredible value in, how sort of the bang for the buck, how many units can we get for these tax dollars to get new units online, to get units that need refurbishment back online, to develop ADUs. So we've been very supportive of those programs. And in infrastructure investments. So project-based tax increment financing is something that has been talked about in this building for 5 years. And it's a program that I think, is going to come up again this year, and we see as a real important way for rural communities, especially to be able to access this program and to build infrastructure when the taxing capacity we know is challenging right now to go to bond for things like water and wastewater. We also try and participate in the Verse Coalition. So I just brought up 2 op-eds that we've done over the years. One is, which was a little bit of a clickbaity name, not gonna lie. This has to stop. This was an op-ed that we did with AARP and the Vermont Professionals of Color Network, talking about how housing projects were getting stopped through the appeals processes by communities that were just saying, sort of not in my backyard. So working with those organizations to say, stopping housing is impacting our workers, it's impacting the ability to attract diversity to Vermont, and it's challenging our seniors who want to be able to keep in our communities. And so that our 3 different organizations could come together on that message. Last year, we did an op-ed with the Vermont Natural Resources Council and the Association of Planning and Developers to talk about the importance of pushing through and collaborating on the Act 250 reform legislation. So we are always happy to try and participate in new coalitions, not let sort of our business organization versus some other type of organization who we may not have always been on the same page with stop us from saying, you want the same outcome, best thing for your members. We want the best thing from our members. We can find a path forward together. And when we're talking about employers and housing, so obviously, this comes from a place of employers sort of getting to that desperate line. I don't think there's any employer I've talked to who is like, I'm so excited to get into the landlord business. I think employers want to stay out of the idea of being a company town as much as a lot of other folks don't want us to see moving back to the idea of a company town. Employers are getting more involved in housing out of a desperation of saying, like, we need to see solutions, and they're not coming forward. We can't keep losing our employees. How do we get engaged? And so our members will call me and just say, what do I do? I'm sick of losing employees because they can't find housing. Can I buy a building and revamp it and then, let my employees live there? And I think I know enough to know that I am not the expert. So was digging around one day and found that New Hampshire has an employer-assisted housing in New Hampshire resource guide. So called my friends at VHFA and said, I know you guys don't have enough to do. So, but I really want this for my members. And Chad and Seth said, okay. And looked at it, and this past year published the Employer Assisted Housing in Vermont Resource Guide. And to me, this is an incredible resource for employers that want to get engaged in the housing conversation, to know paths that are available to them to do it in a really thoughtful way that supports the community and sort of that like rising tides floats all boats sort of way. If you're investing in housing in your community, your employees will benefit. And so that magic.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's great, the data that's provided. It's definitely a conversation that I think is important to have both in here and in commerce. And I know those conversations are going on you know, I have a lot of questions about it, so I hope that we kind of revisit that at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would like to put a pin in that to have those conversations. You know, we've talked about it a bit in here before, but I think those are important conversations to have about what that means to have employee housing in our communities and community-based housing, and just having those conversations is important.
Megan, it's 10 o'clock.
I'm gonna be so
Oh,
fast.
sorry.
Okay, so, so this idea around, you know, as our engagement around employers' needs in housing and those in strategic investments, bring us to the Budget Adjustment Act. So we, are in full support of the HFA's request in the Budget Adjustment Act for $25 million to go to the Middle Income Homeownership Development Program and the Rental Revolving Loan Fund. I know Maura has been in here and talked about these programs, so I won't go into the details unless there are questions, and Chad is also here. There are questions about those, but would just say that, you know, both of these programs have been really important for putting new units on the market for renters and homeowners in our workforce, and both are out of funding right now. And we would love to see them back up and running, putting more units up. So full support of that. I have sent, I think maybe you've gotten the printed letter. I sent our letter of support. We'll be sending it to appropriations as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Austin
MIA.
is not here.
Want me to go check?
Megan, did you send
No one
that?
trusts me. I'll go.
I trust you.
I am working on sending that. to
Oh, great,
Rachel.
okay, yeah.
We have a brilliant communications person who makes it look beautiful in Canva and then needs to compress it to send it in a PDF, which is beyond my knowledge.
And I came back, I didn't swap out.
Sorry.
There's a first time for everything.
Right. I found them.
Listening in the wings, waiting for.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's kind of hard to get into the seating area in this committee when you're.
Austin, we're a little time constrained.
Yeah,
I think 10 minutes is sort of.
Well, I just requested to get in to. Yeah. Get rid of the YouTube stream that I was watching. So, while I'm getting this up and going, for the record, Austin Davis, I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Lake Champlain Chamber. And I'm going to try to pull up my slides, but I might.
We can see them on our website.
Okay, well, that might make it easier. By the way, happy birthday. I didn't realize until later.
Yeah.
I talked to you
I
yesterday.
hope this continues for next week. This has been really nice.
Just keep it going.
Yeah, just forever.
Yeah, we're having a party on Monday at 8:30.
That's for me.
All right, so folks can see, yeah. All right, so I'll be really quick. I was following along with Dolly Megan's testimony, and so I know you folks have a lot of questions. So I was anticipating a little bit of time with slides and then just giving ample time for questions. I guess just jump in as we go. But I wanted to give you a quick overview of the Lake Champlain Chamber. Most of the time you folks will just be dealing with me, especially folks from outside our region. They often just deal with me. But I did want folks to just get a perspective about what we're about and our various programming that we have. Talent BTV is kind of our recruitment, retention, relocation work that we do, as well as our Burlington Young Professionals Network. It's pretty commonplace for a lot of things you've probably seen from your own regional chambers from different parts of the state. We have some unique programs that I'd go into if I had more time. LaunchBT is our business accelerator, and we actually have about, as of now, about 90 alum that have gone through this. We're looking for businesses that can, that are in the startup, phase two, if you will. And they are really just need a little bit of oomph behind them to kind of build them up. And we hope to see them scale to become anchor employers in the state. Here are a couple of the employers that we've helped over the years. And actually this infographic on the left here is a couple years outdated, but the quickest one I could find when I was putting these together. And you can kind of see the impact that we've had here by getting behind these. It's a lot about connecting our members, our current members, to our future members that are these startups that are trying to scale. So a lot of times when you think about business incubators, it's about putting a lot of money behind startups and kind of just letting them go wild. This is more of a concierge service where we're connecting members who are, say, attorneys or accountants or others with these folks, and they're donating in-kind services to these folks. They're going to help them get through that next phase, and they'll hopefully have a lifelong client, so everyone wins. Hello Burlington's our regional marketing organization, and that's about bringing in and filling all of the hotels in the region. And Hello Burlington's not just about Burlington, but the greater Burlington area, just like we serve the northwest part of the state. A lot of times when we have tourists or visitors coming into town, they don't understand when they go to Essex or Shelburne or Colchester that they're not in Burlington. The delineation doesn't really matter to them. They go to Bolton and they go, wow, Burlington's got a great ski hill just right in their backyard. And, we'll all go, well, Flatlander, that's not Burlington, but they don't care. So it's the banner for the greater Burlington area and the marketing organization for that. And then we also have Leadership Champlain, which is a talent development program. It's been around for 35 years. I'm an alumni of it. You've had some notable alumni who are colleagues. You've had a former speaker that was an alumni of the program. It's a fantastic opportunity to kind of scale up folks' knowledge about their own communities. It's a year-long intensive program where we poll people one day a month, and we do a business and economy, a healthcare, and climate and energy. We do all these days to kind of get them exposure to folks at the top of our membership, folks who work in these spaces. So with all that, I just did that in a lightning round. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I just wanted to introduce you to, shouldn't be any shocker, our priorities for the year, which are around affordability, housing, and public safety, which you folks kind of touch all of those things. That's why I love this committee and why I'll be here a lot. But I wanted to just kind of give you perspective of how we're looking at things based off the work we've done in the summer and fall with a working group on public education that we stood up. And one thing about the chamber is that's really helpful is if you want expertise in anything, we likely have it. We have upwards of 1,000 members that are in our region, but also statewide. And so if I want to find folks who have expertise in education, I can find bankers, lawyers, manufacturers, folks who in their free time are also on their school boards and other things. So we've leveraged that. We had a really great working group. But with this, you can kind of see that we're breaking down you can see in the gold boxes, some systemic issues in our state and around how we comply with the Brigham decision. And it's important that we don't take issue with the Brigham decision, but we take issue with how we comply with it. Our housing affordability and our demographic trends. And these things are feeding off of each other in such a way that it's kind of creating this downward spiral that we need to pull out of. And so we want to address each of these individually, and your committee's got a part in this. The thing I think that
Real quick,
question, yeah.
on that last slide, I actually had a constituent reach out who's on the work group. Do you have, and maybe you sent it already and I lost track, but do you have a work product from this yet?
We have a draft work product.
Oh, okay, so
I've been
I didn't
told-
miss it.
Yeah, I've been told that I've shared that around with some folks.
Okay, I just would love to hear like when you have it, if you want to send it to us or other.
Feedback we've gotten was that what would be most helpful would be if it could be in response to what's rolled out on the 28th. So we've kind of
Okay.
holding our powder a little bit dry.
Okay, got it and
We're
missed
gonna-
it.
We're gonna, cross some T's and dot some I's.
Gotcha.
After that.
Just want to make sure I didn't miss it.
Yeah. So, at the base of all of our issues are really just a lack of housing. And you can see that our housing supply and growth has dropped precipitously over the years. And what I think is unique from our perspective, that we really want to drive home to everybody we can. It's just this issue of how Brigham compliance has affected ground list growth in the state. And, you know, on this slide, you can see kind of the relationship between school boards, town government, you know, developers and the local ground list that existed pre-Brigham. Because we had a system where, you know, your local ground list funded your local school. And actually, I think South Burlington's one of the best examples of this. They had an ordinance on the books that if the school budget didn't grow by a percentage that exceeded the grand list growth, then actually the budget never had to go to the voters. So what you had here is this relationship between the select board and the school board that was about developing the grand list, developing housing stock, bringing in employers, doing whatever it took to fuel the school they wanted. And I think, you know, you saw some disparities that actually grew out of that. And that's why we have the Brigham decision. That's important. But one of the ways we complied with that is we moved to a system where we have a statewide grand list. So we consistently have this conversation about how we have local control with statewide dollars in the education space. What we keep asking legislators to keep in mind and think about, and it's especially important in the context of housing development, is that we also have an issue of local control of the development of the statewide dollars, because it's a statewide grand list that funds the education system. And that is the aggregate of all the local grand lists. And who controls the the development of local grand lists? It's your local town government. So we have two streams of local control, the confluence of which is our education fund. And so we need to have conversations about how not only do we necessarily regulate the control of the spending of education fund dollars, but also the contributions to education fund dollars. And I think, we've had some very important pieces of legislation in the last couple of years, the Home Act, Act 181, that get at some of this, but we need to kind of bring back that conversation and start having it in that context. This kind of just summarizes that, so I'll skip. And the other thing we really are concerned about is our aging demographics. And you can't fix our aging demographics without fixing our housing supply. You can't, and vice versa. These things are all entangled. And, I'm sure folks have learned quite a bit about this. There's a great report from December by the Joint Fiscal Office that covers, which I pulled the slide from. The long and short of it is we're moving to a situation where we're going to ask a smaller percentage of our population, a very small percentage of our population, to carry the workforce load and the tax load for everyone else. And that's just not sustainable at the end of the day. And we need to reverse those trends. We need to reverse them quickly. So with that, any questions?
That was like supermarket sweet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
How many members do you have?
As I said, we're close to about 1,000.
And do you know what proportion that is of all of the businesses in your coverage area?
I'm not entirely sure. I think I'd have to look up statewide statistics. Businesses come and go too. You'd probably have to go and say states' websites, see how the businesses there are in the state. And yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
Would you mind finding that out?
Yeah, I mean, I can.
And I'm sure your sales arm probably has an idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets difficult when you look at, businesses in the region that are even just registered, but actually not doing business in the region necessarily, things like that. It gets tough. I can look into it for you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And the committee, I think what we should do is take a 5-minute break. We've got,
Shift gears.
before we shift gears, let's take a 5-minute break, but please keep it to 5 minutes so that we have 4 witnesses on the panel. And so and they will have 45 minutes. So let's try to keep it to 5 minutes.